I don't know what you guys were talking about when I was outside taking some pictures, but I remember when we were on the phone, you kind of described Isla as this girl with like this invisible diagnosis because she looks like she is, I mean, obviously she's doing well and bouncing around and happy, but she's got this underlying thing that not a lot of people see.
Yeah, exactly.
So how have you guys kind of on that journey accepted that, and
well, it's
how do you
interesting
explain that?
Because you would think when she was a baby, that's when we would think, oh my gosh, this is so hard. She was fracturing every other week and major fractures. And it's like, oh, how am I going to do this? This is so difficult. And now reflecting on that, I feel like that was the easy part. And now is the hard part, because now it's like she's at this age where, like I was saying, like it's like, well, I can physically do these things. So why can't I join a soccer team and be a cheerleader? It's her. She really wants to be a cheerleader, and she has all these things that she wants to do, and she wants to do like real ballet, and it's
and that's things you didn't have to worry about when she was smaller.
Exactly, because when she was smaller, if we went to a party and there was a bounce house, we could be like, oh, let's go over there and see that super fun balloon, and she would toddle over, okay, and very easily distractible. Now it's like devastating when there's a class party and there's a bounce house and every kid in the class is super excited about it, and she knows deep down, like, I'm not going to be able to do that. So,
and you're at the age where you're having to explain that.
Exactly.
And she's trying to have to, just like trying to explain it to other people, her also having to come to that understanding, like, I feel great. I can do these things. Yeah. And then there's understanding that underlying diagnosis, which is probably really tough.
It's
to transition
very
into knowledge, maybe?
Yes,
exactly. And to teach her these things so that when she is at school or somewhere on her own.
Your daughter is in pain, and you are unsure why. And now, law enforcement is asking you a lot of questions that are pointing in a terrifying direction. My name is Seth Carnell, and this is the Go Shout Love podcast. Today's conversation surrounds a diagnosis that has two major issues we don't normally come across or talk about in these episodes. One, the medical condition surrounding this month's kid is not noticeable by appearance. And two, because of that, and a few other issues you will hear about, today's parents had their kids removed from their custody while they were trying to get answers. We are talking with Nick and Amanda, who are the parents to Isla, an extremely courageous young lady who is diagnosed with osteogenesis imperfecta type 5. Although there's a lot more to it, this diagnosis means her bones are very fragile and causes significant pain. This is one adorable family that will have you smiling from the second you walk into the door to the second you leave. Today, Nick and Amanda talk about Isla's diagnosis and what that means for their family, but they will also talk about what happened one night when they took Isla to the hospital as she was noticeably in pain. What was already a confusing and worrisome evening slowly turned into a parent's nightmare that will last for the coming weeks and months. I could go into more detail, but it's best if you hear it from them. In this conversation is Josh Veach, our executive director, and Jessica Santo, our family relations director and talented photographer. You will also hear the kids in the background occasionally playing, which includes little Coco, who was very wary of my camera and microphones. Before we begin, I just want to say thank you to Nick and Amanda for not only letting us into their home, but for being open and authentic about their story.
So the doctors, how they've described it is like severe arthritis in like a senior person. That's like how she just feels 24/7. Yeah, or like osteoporosis in the elderly, or something along those lines. Is how she feels.
I mean, she hasn't had any major accidents.
No. I mean, the thing with her is she's like fearless. So she'll do whatever. I mean, she kind of knows, but I don't know that it actually stops her.
Yeah, she's fearless but cautious. I mean, I feel like she knows her boundaries and she won't just like jump into something, because in the back of her mind she does know, like, okay, this is something that mommy and daddy probably would say isn't safe, but she does definitely push her boundaries, because again, at the end of the day, she's 5
And
it's
she
hard.
can physically do these things. So why can't I do these things?
And you're saying to her it isn't safe, but she's seeing all the other kids her age do it.
Yeah.
So it is safe, but not for her.
Yeah, like bounce houses will be the death of me.
Yeah.
I
But hey, you just had a
love
foam party.
bounce
Like how
houses.
great! I didn't even put that together. That foam's safe.
Yeah,
you can have a foam party.
Exactly. But it's like, I don't know why I didn't think about this, but I guess like bounce houses are the thing when you're 5. Like that's
Sure.
what every single kid has at their birthday party.
and
then
that's not happening.
yeah, and they have, I don't know if they have these where you guys have to pump it up. It's like a big warehouse with just like a trillion bounce houses. That's literally, yesterday I was sitting at my desk at work and I just started crying at my desk. And my coworker was like, "What's wrong?" And I was like, "I just received the 3rd invitation for her birthday party at Pump It Up in 2 hours, like for Isla's class. 3 birthday party invitations in 2 hours for Pump It Up. Like, why? Like, if I get one more of these, I'm gonna scream, because that's like the hot spot in kindergarten to have your birthday party, and she cannot go there. I mean, there's literally nothing for her to do there. And
So you say that what she's going through is invisible. So do you have the opportunity to share with her classmates and their parents what is going on, since they can't physically see it?
yeah, so in pre-K and preschool we did. Now she's not comfortable with that. So she's at the point now where she wants to be like everyone else. And it's a brand new thing for us.
And well, for me, it's almost more difficult to explain it to people, because then they like, they like freak
It
out.
changes how they
why she
view and
doesn't
how
Yeah.
they interact with her.
Yeah, and then like they get like super, like in the beginning, like some people like closer friends and stuff like that were kind of like, I don't know if I can watch her. Like they felt uncomfortable doing it, and so now it's that was kind of a interesting thing to navigate. That wasn't something that we expected to be like having to face. So in that regard, it's almost, I have a brother with Down syndrome, so I've grown up forever knowing. I mean, he's 2 years younger than me, so I've dealt with special needs and stuff like that my entire life, and it is one of those things where it's kind of like you want people to be aware, but at the same time, it cuts. It's a real fine line you got to walk, because they'll start treating you different, or they either start treating you like you can't do things, or like a bit try to help everything, or feel bad for
if
you.
you're helpless, so.
And it's like, I know my brother, even to this day, he just wants to be normal. He just wants to be like everybody else.
Yeah.
So, and if you feed into treating them differently,
Right.
it lowers their self-esteem, and it also creates kind of like a I wouldn't say victim, but they kind of learn to manipulate and then also feed into it. It's a
That's interesting.
self-reinforcing. If you treat them that way, it reinforces the fact that they are different, even though.
And so you probably carry that over to Isla, just what you said, so that she doesn't become that way too. As parents, you want to protect her and make sure she's safe, but at the same time, let her know that she can do things.
Yeah,
on
no,
her own.
definitely,
That was
definitely.
definitely a difference between him and I when she got diagnosed, because like you said, he's dealt with special needs his whole life, and he doesn't even see special needs. He sees everybody, that's because that's how he grew up. And out of all his brothers, he's closest in a relationship to his brother with Down syndrome than his other 2 brothers. He's the oldest of 4, and him and Brandon have the closest relationship. So for me, it was like, oh my gosh, it was a big deal for me internally of how I'm going to parent this child. And it was terrifying. And Nick kind of just was like, all right, this is what's going on. Let's keep the ball rolling. I was like, oh my gosh, and I was afraid to change her clothes and do things like that. And that also created a different relationship between him and Isla, and with Isla and me. Isla he's her go-to, because as a baby, she almost could feel my nervousness when I would have to move her places when she was fractured. And I would try so hard, but I was so scared of hurting her. And because typically I was always the one there when she did fracture. And it gave me really bad PTSD hearing the bones crack and everything.
Oh my gosh.
And so he was so
confident and easygoing about it that it got to the point when she would fracture, he would have to take like the full week off because she would only let him touch her and move her from place to place and so on. So,
and that had to be hard as a mom to kind of hand over those reins, but
yeah,
how lucky you are to have a partner that you can do that with.
Yeah, definitely. And she is like, I always say she's the definition of a daddy's girl. Definition of that for sure. But she's very double guesses me a lot of things, and let's ask daddy first, which I'm fine with. I like seeing that relationship. To me, I think it's really special and really cool. So,
Sure.
Especially,
I want to talk about her diagnosis, but I also want to talk about her as a kindergartner. So what are the things that she is able to do and does love to do? Did you mention ballet on our phone call?
She did ballet, and then once it started to get more physically demanding, we had to throw in the towel on that. Now she does hula, which has been like this huge saving grace. It is so cool, and it's something that
and you found a group here in San Jose? Oh
yes, right in Campbell, which is about 20 minutes from here. And she actually has a big show coming up in September where there's like hundreds of people in this big theater. But it's just so cool because there's nothing that has to be modified for her, which is something that is not the norm for us. So, and any kind of recreational sport or, dance class, everything has to be modified in some way, shape, or form. PE, everything. So in hula, nothing has to be modified.
Wow.
So she can just show up and be her.
100% inclusive.
Hula, that is so neat.
What you put the piggy in the bed?
Super cool. So she does hula. I wouldn't say she loves it because it's a lot of work, but she does it and she shows up and she doesn't say she doesn't want to do it. But, practicing anything is a lot. So
I bet she looks so cute when she does it too.
Yeah, she does look very, very cute. At school, she's very creative. She's total
arts and crafts.
Yeah, she's a dreamer.
Color.
Like she has a great imagination.
Yeah.
Like a very impressive imagination. So she loves drawing. She loves like playing, house or doctor, or she loves those things.
Imaginary play.
Yeah,
That's great.
and she's really great with independent. She'll play by herself.
Yeah,
for
she'll be in her room
hours,
playing
just talking
forever, and
between
everyone
the
else is out
dolls.
here.
And she's been like that since she was little. When she would be immobilized with a fracture, she could sit there and self-entertain herself for hours and never complain.
And if she wanted something, she would literally butt scoot. Big old cast on her leg, and she just didn't even stop her. I mean,
She'd
she's
always
just
wear
like,
a cast down.
I'm going.
As a matter of fact, at one point, the very first time she ever did that, Noah was little because they are 23 months apart. And she wanted something, and she was not even 2. Maybe she was 1.5. And he was saying, in his little voice, he's like, Isla, you can't do that. And hearing the words, you can't do that, it was like you saw the light switch in her eyes, like, oh, well, now I am going to do it.
Who?
And she picked herself up with the strength of her arm, plopped herself down, and scooted across. And I actually have it. I recorded it because I don't even know why I was recording. And Noah was just so little. He's like, I just shocked, and I was shocked because we really didn't think she could do it. Oh, wow. So she's very determined. She's very, very determined.
So you said determined. What are 2 other words that you would use to describe Isla?
She's brave. She's the bravest little girl I've ever met. When she was a baby, her first infusion, her whole nursing team were like, "This is the bravest girl in California." She was like 8 months old.
I also got another piece.
And she could handle she's handled
I don't think she's ever cried during
everything
her
that's been
IVs,
thrown at her that would break
from
an
8
adult.
months.
She's handled it with so much grace, like so much grace. She is so brave. It's incredible. She sits in those hospital rooms for hours with the best. You would think she was at Disneyland. She has the best attitude about it. She looks forward to it. She would call them her bone juice days when she was little. But she's very, very, very brave. Very
And how
brave.
often are you having those infusions?
They used to be every 3 months. The
They
first,
were every 8 weeks at first,
and that was how many years?
for a year
2
and a half.
Yeah, almost 2 years.
And then it went to every 3 months, and now it's every 6 months. They just switched to every 6 months, I think a year ago.
And will that be for just entirely for the future?
So I think there's no set like.
Everything's kind of like a trial basis because it's
So-
specifically her OI type 5. They only have 100 reported cases in the world of it that are medically documented.
Wow.
So it's like a trial, like we're a case study, basically. They don't, even when they cut back her infusions, it was like, okay, we'll see what happens. If she starts fracturing, then we'll put them back on the other schedule. So everything is like a case study, basically. We even have like medical students come in the room during her infusions that are in school at Stanford.
Yeah,
and
because
just
it's so rare.
Yeah, to see somebody they've only read about in textbook in person. But they say she probably, in her adulthood, once a year for pain management.
So they say after a certain point, the benefits of the infusion are no longer there, but people continue it for maintenance to deal with the pain. Apparently, and there's nothing. It's not that this is what the medication is designed to do. It's just something that they've noticed that they say when they stop getting it, that they start feeling more pain. And literally as they're getting the infusion, they can feel the pain start to subside. Wow. So it's kind of like one of those things where they're like, okay, well, we'll continue it, on a limited basis to help deal with your pain management. But after a certain age, the benefits of it for the bones itself.
After puberty, I think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are no longer there, and it can actually start being negative where
Starts
the
making
bones start
difference.
fusing together because it's too much medication. They'll start stiffening.
Which would also make them fracture. So, yeah, it's a fine line of treatment.
How long has this process been in place or available?
Long time, 25
Okay, so it's not
years
like
or
brand
so.
new.
No, it's not brand new, but if you think about like a human's life, right? Like
Right,
they
yeah.
start, it's not long enough to find
To
out
test
the
out.
full effects
Yeah,
for
sure.
an entire lifetime.
Sure.
And that was one of the things that was difficult in the beginning was like doctors, they can't tell you what's going to happen. They can't tell you, if they're going to be able to walk. Are they going to be, are they going to have any deformity? Like they say, just have to wait and see.
Yeah.
Like that's number one.
We had no prognosis. At
And then
all.
number two is this medication. Okay, well,
We don't know the long-term effects.
Yeah, we don't.
Yeah.
What are the pluses? What are the
Basically,
minuses?
many paper
Like,
was to sign. A lot was like a stack this big to be like, we are agreeing to this and we won't hold you liable.
And
so
I'm
that was
sure-
very scary.
You guys are faithful people, but how do you navigate that world of unknowing and not knowing the future of that?
Yeah.
I mean, you just have to depend on your faith and
Yeah, it's
trust that you're doing
Yeah.
what you guys think is absolutely best for her right now.
one of the things that I had to do almost immediately was leave an OI support group because it was not good for my mental health. So there's so many opinions in there and there's so many tragic stories, and it's like you want to be there to comment and be supportive and comment on these posts and be there for people, but at a certain point you have to make that boundary for yourself. Is this healthy for me? And it got to the point where after we decided to go with the infusions, I was in this group and there were so many OI families that don't get these infusions because of that simple fact that they don't know the long-term effects on it. And there's, for every family that doesn't get them, there's a family that does. And
It's a lot of opinions.
it's a lot of opinions. And I was just like, I can't read this stuff anymore. I can't see this anymore. And I just have to trust the opinion of our doctors, who are amazing, and we owe so much to them. And of course our faith. And, at the end of the day, weighing the options, it was just like...
we put her doctors through pretty hefty stress because we had been dealing with other doctors that that whole the medical profession is just like any other job. You've got people that are there just to punch in and punch out, and you've got people that actually care about what they're doing. And so it's, you have to advocate to find out, like, okay, does this person know what they're talking about? You have to do all your due diligence before going into it. And it's like her team are more like, I don't know if you guys ever seen the show House, but they're like that.
Yeah.
They're like him. Like we went to her, what's doctor, the
Bachrock.
no Frick, pediatric orthopedic
surgeon.
And because she's got it's right here is fusing together, and so she can't move her arm past, like her hand past here on this arm she can make it to about here, but she can't make it all the way flat. And so these are fusing together, and he's been keeping an eye on it, and he's like, I'm gonna see, so he's talked to doctors that he knows like around the world, and find out some did surgery and they're like, no, just don't do it, it's not worth it, like made it worse, and he's like, and he flat out told us, like, right now nothing seems to be like the way to go. He's like, but I'm gonna try and figure this out. We're gonna figure something out. I'm gonna figure something out. Might not be right now, but I'm not giving up on getting this done.
Yeah, he's amazing.
And so it's finding people like
blessing.
that helps make the decisions that much easier, or not that much easier, but helps make the decision, you feel better about the decision that you're making, because it's a
just
big
have complete
decision.
trust in him.
Yeah, because they're this big, right? And what you're doing is going to be, it doesn't go away. It's there, it's in their bones forever. So it's kind of like,
we hear a lot of families who find support on the Facebook groups, on social media, and there's a lot of beauty in it. But it's also nice to know that you had the knowledge to say, this isn't helping me right now. I need to step back, because sometimes the opinions do get overwhelming, and we all need to just set a boundary.
Exactly.
And did you kind of relieve a big breath out when you did it?
Oh my goodness, yes. And it was, like I said, it was a difficult decision, because I am the type of person that wants to be that support for somebody, because especially when she got diagnosed, it was hard, because that was my saving grace. I literally looked up hashtags of osteogenesis imperfecta type 5, and I found like 2 people in the world with it on social media, and reached out to them, and they were like, it's gonna be okay. And so ever since then, like, I wanted to be that person for people also. And so when I left that group, I felt guilty for a moment, just like this is what helped me those first, several weeks of her diagnosis. And now I feel like I'm abandoning and this whole situation. But yeah, I think with social media, there's
even
so
leaving
much
that
beauty
pressure
there.
too, leaving that pressure of not having to worry about other people, even though you naturally do that, but having the knowledge to step back.
Yeah, and just having those worries, it's just like asking for unwanted trouble. I'm seeing these kids that walked until they were 4, and then once they were like 5, 6, they became completely immobile with OI. And I'm barring worry, like I don't, if that happens, that happens, and we'll cross that bridge when we get there, and it will be okay. Like I know that, but why should I sit there and worry each year that goes by, because this is what I'm seeing, and my heart breaks for them, and I feel for them, and I want to support them. But like I said, I had to set that boundary where this is not healthy for me mentally. And it was a big breath of fresh air, and I have to say I never looked back. I haven't been on
That's great advice you can
group.
give any family on a rare journey.
Yeah, it's just like, they say, don't Google, like, doctors will tell you, stop Googling the rash on your arm, or stop Googling why your eyesight is blurry, because, everything says cancer, It's the same thing, where it's like, sometimes it's not good if you have that kind of personality where you tend to go down rabbit holes like I do. Not everybody is like that. Some people, are very, they have a good mindset, and they know when to stop or not to think any further into it. I'm not like that, and I know that about myself. So I never went back on. I probably have not been in that group since she was 2. And I'm not even on Facebook anymore in general anymore. But I have to say, Instagram I am on, and I do find a huge support there. And it's been really great, because I can't even tell you how many people find me through hashtags and reach out to me from all over the world. And it's been, it's a blessing to be able to be that person for someone that someone was for me.
I want to pause real quick, because I normally say this up front, and where I was getting ready to go with the next question is a little more sensitive. And so it's when we go into conversations, we want to help tell your story, but we want to do, and specifically Isla's story, but we want to do that with as much care as possible. And so if there's at any point a topic where we go into a line of questioning that you guys aren't comfortable with, please just say, we don't want to talk about that, and we'll just move right along. I normally try to give that disclaimer up front, and so I didn't this time. And so
we're with the right people because we're open book.
So you can edit that out when we get there. So with that said, we've talked a little bit about kind of where Isla is now and a little bit about the diagnosis, but your journey to a diagnosis is unique and probably different than any we've ever experienced because it goes beyond just medical.
Yeah.
Nick's getting comfy.
So tell us, like, what were the first indications that something medically was going on, and then kind of where that story went from there?
Yeah. So
just to preface, it's not unique, and that's the problem.
yeah. Yeah.
That's it. May be unique. It's unique until you go through it and realize how not
common it
unique.
is.
Yeah,
Sure.
that's
Yeah.
true. That is
That's-
very true.
That's the biggest
Isla,
thing.
Noah,
Hey, you guys,
want
why don't
to
you
go
go play in
Grammy's
your
room
room?
and put the TV on?
Yeah.
Like, finally. No, are you going to?
Yeah, he went.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, he did? I didn't even
Yeah.
see him get up.
He's gone.
He's like, thank you. So I actually had signs of something with Isla since she was born.
And how old was Noah when she was born?
So they're November, December. So let's say they're 23 months apart.
Okay.
So he was a month away from turning 2.
Okay.
So I held on to that for as long as possible. I have 2 under 2 for 30 days. Feel bad for me. But yeah, so he was just about to turn 2. But very early on, after she was born, when I would lift her, I would hear and feel almost like a popping noise and movement where, like, you know, when your joints, like, you crack your leg and you feel it pop out of place momentarily and you're like, oh, like, I would hear that and feel that with her. And I would bring it up to her pediatrician every single well check, which is in the beginning, you know, you go at the 1 week, you go at the 2 weeks, 3 weeks after that, I think it goes to 6 and then 8, the well checks with the doctor. I would constantly bring it up. And we had a very dismissive pediatrician, which at that time I actually appreciated because I felt like, oh, I like that he doesn't like feed into new parent worries. You know, he's like, it's okay, you guys are going to survive. Yes.
Yeah.
And so we actually liked that about him. Ironically, that turned out to be really not well.
The big, later, right?
Yeah.
But in the beginning, so she came out, like, labor was like, she
flew
shot
up,
out.
Yeah, I sneezed and she came out.
Yeah, and
When they put her on me, we recorded it. We have it recorded. I was in such shock. She was on me and they kept saying, like, I was repeating, she's here, as I'm looking at her. I was in actual state of shock because I didn't even feel her come out.
But she did cry for a much longer than Noah had, which at the time was kind of like, is she gonna stop crying
Yeah, we couldn't
anytime?
get her to
Like,
calm
what's
down.
going on here? Like, I mean, eventually it wasn't super long, but it was long enough to the point where you start thinking,
Is everything okay?
is everything all right?
Yeah.
You know, like that was sign number 1, and then the popping and everything, and her eyes, all the whites of her eyes were like
not
a
white.
gray.
Yeah.
Like they were not white at all. It was like the color of the couch. Like
She had these blue eyes, but they weren't white.
it was very strange.
And that's another thing I kept repeatedly bring up to the pediatrician. And he would say, okay, if it's like that the next appointment, I'll refer you to a specialist. Well, it'd be like that the next appointment. And then he would say, okay, let's wait till 6 months. If it's still like that in 6 months, I'll refer you to a specialist. Okay, 6 months came and they're still like that. And I'm still hearing those popping noises. And he'd be like, oh, well, you know, she looks fine. And okay, let's make a deal. At 1 year, her 1 year well check, if they still look like that, I'll refer you to a specialist. And I was trusting of him because he was our pediatrician for Noah as well. And he had known both of my kids since the day they were born. He was the one that came to the hospital when they were born. So I was like, okay, I'm probably just overreacting. So then basically one day, right before she turned 8, a couple weeks before she turned 8 months old, she was crawling. It was a Sunday.
No, she was I was in the room with her.
Oh, leaning forward. That's
And
right.
she was sitting up. She hadn't started crawling yet. She was sitting up, and she started to lean forward. I was sitting, like, she was, like, right there. I'm sitting in a chair about that far away. And she's just sitting up with her legs straight, and she's kind of leaning. And I was, like, encouraging her to, like, okay, you can crawl, you know, get over on your stomach. And she was leaning forward, and I just heard, like, this pop, and then she just started crying. And
Screaming uncontrollably.
yeah, and it was, and I mean, she was inconsolable for an
she was
hour and a
screaming
half or something like
so
that.
loud that I came out of the room. Noah and I were in the bedroom. I remember it like a movie scene where like we were in the bedroom jumping on the bed having this grand old time, and I heard her screaming, and I had never heard her scream like that before. And I remember I immediately ran out of the room, and I was like, what happened? And he was like, nothing. Like, and then he told me that that's what happened. I'm like, that's weird. And we were on our way to my parents' house for dinner. It was a Sunday. We always have Sunday dinner with our family. And so we were on our way over there, and she was just inconsolable, like really, really fussy. And we had the whole family just happened to just get over that stomach flu. So we were like, well, maybe she's coming down with that stomach flu. So we'll just give her some Motrin. And so we gave her Motrin, but she was still...
She ended up calming down, but she was kind of out of it. Like if you looked in her face, you could see she was just kind of out of it. But she ended up calming down that night once we got over to her parents' house.
And my mom had to walk her up and down the street. It was definitely odd behavior.
Yeah.
But the coincidence was we just got over a stomach flu. So we could pin it on that.
Yeah, you're trying to justify what a
Exactly.
seemingly nothing thing. Okay, what could be going on causing this? Yeah.
Yeah, and then we put her, so what had actually happened was she fractured her femur in half. It was completely displaced. It was in 2 different pieces. We had no idea.
Oh my gosh.
And she went to sleep that night perfectly fine with a femur in 2 pieces.
Oh my gosh.
No idea. I mean, it wasn't like she was screaming off. She ended up being inconsolable, like Nick said. And then we gave her the Motrin, and so we're like, oh, totally the flu then, because she's fine. You know, she's acting out of it, but she's not crying anymore. And so we ended up putting her to bed that night. She slept through the night, 100% fine, with a femur in 2 pieces. And that Monday morning, Nick's mother, my mother-in-law, Hillary, she always took the kids on Mondays and spent like the day with them. And so she came to pick them up as normal because I was like, you know, she might be coming down with something, just in case you don't want to take her. She's like, no, it's okay. We'll just lay low at the house then. And I was like, she's acting out kind of weird, but you know, we just all had that stomach flu. Oh, okay, yeah, totally fine. So she took them to her house that day. And I remember being at the nail salon, getting my nails done. And his mom texting me and being like, you know, I think something's wrong. She's, she was like,
she's fine, but anytime you go
move
near
her-
her leg or move her leg, like she starts getting
uncomfortable.
Yeah, fussy, kind of like.
And then she was like, and I think she's she told us she thinks she's favoring it. She's not really moving it. So I think she called the doctor. So I'm like, okay, that's weird. And so I called our doctor, our normal pediatrician immediately. And they got me in that day. And we took her to the doctor. I took her to the pediatrician. He was at work.
No, we met there. It was like the last appointment of the day, so it was like 4:30, and it was July 3rd.
The day before 4th of July.
And so we get there, and he's looking, he's moving her around, and she's
not
fine.
screaming.
She's not. I mean, and she's happy, like playing. I mean,
Jeez.
I mean, unreal, like just
Yeah.
completely normal.
When you realize what was really going on, it's pretty incredible.
Well, the X-ray tech said it best. I mean, he was just.
He was like, if there was, so basically he was moving her leg around and she wasn't having these big reactions to it. But he's like, but yeah, I can kind of see that, you know, she's favoring it. He's like, but you know what? It's the day before a holiday. I can't get you in for an X-ray if you guys are really that concerned about it.
The X-ray closes in like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Like,
so he's like, if you guys
have
are
to go to
really that
ER.
concerned, and he even said, if you can't sleep, if you're gonna feel like you can't sleep tonight, then you have to then just go to the emergency room. He's like, otherwise, I think she might have just pulled a muscle. And so then Nick was like,
I'm looking at it. So at this point now she's holding her, and I'm looking like the whole time, and I'm like, it doesn't look right. I was like, does her leg look swollen? He's like, no, it doesn't look swollen. And I'm like, I look at him, And I look at her again, and I take her, and I pick her straight up, and her leg's like twice the size of the other one.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, okay, yeah, you should take her in.
Yeah.
I'm
He
just like, are you kidding
originally
me?
was going to send us home saying that she had a pulled muscle. So we went to the emergency room, and Noah was at home with my niece, who was 18 at the time, and she was watching him. And we went to the emergency room. First thing I did was an x-ray, and long story short, it was a complete displaced fracture. And I remember at one point, one doctor or nurse coming in, like, did you give her anything? And I was like, Motrin last night. They're like, what else is she on? What else did you give her? I'm like, nothing. Like, she had some Motrin last night. And they were like, if there was a grown man in here with this injury, he would be screaming on the top of his lungs right now. And we look over at her, and she's sitting on the hospital bed, just like playing with the rattle and laughing and drinking her bottle. Like, she was not totally fine, like we know, but it was fine enough where we just thought it was a stomach flu. I mean, it was incredible. So from there, they ended up doing more x-rays, and that's when we were in the room with her, the three of us, and the doctor came in, and she told us that they found multiple fractures, healed fractures and new fractures within her ribs. And from there, I kind of just went blank. I honestly thought she had like cancer or bone cancer. I didn't know. Like, I just was like, obviously she didn't have any accidents. I know nothing happened. So there's a reason why her bones are breaking internally. It must be cancer. Like, that's what I initially thought. And I actually walked out of the room and I threw up outside. And he stayed in there and continued to talk to her. And I was thinking she was going to just give us this horrible diagnosis, and I couldn't handle it at that moment, and I walked out. And then when we came back in, that's just when the circus began. CPS was called. But they were very reassuring to us, like, this is just protocol. Like, we just have to do this because it's an immobile child
They're
with a
mandated
fracture.
reporters.
They're mandated reporters.
Right.
And we were super understanding of that.
So they're calling CPS because of the fractures.
Yes, because she was an immobile child. Because she was not crawling yet, she wasn't anything, and we couldn't tell them how it happened.
Wow.
But she was very reassuring to us that this is just protocol. Don't worry, we're mandated reporters. And we were like, oh yeah, that's, we get that, totally understandable.
Sure. Yeah, we're just like, yeah, dude, do your thing,
But
like,
in the meantime, we're thinking, on the flip side, they're trying to diagnose her. Like, we think that that's what they're doing. They're trying to find a medical explanation for this, and this is just like the paperwork part, which is understandable. Everybody has the paperwork part of their job. So we were super cooperative, but also on edge because we're just wondering what's wrong with our baby. But it's okay. They're taking, they're running tests. They're doing, they're trying to figure that out, and then we're going to get to that part next. And before you know it, the local police department is there. And they want to separate us and question us in different areas and
Separate you two.
Yeah.
Wow.
And
meanwhile, our pediatrician ends up showing up when the cops get there. They end up calling him. He shows up with her full records.
And I'm so thankful. I'm like, I literally jumped and gave him a hug. Like, I was so relieved he was there because I was just like, oh my goodness, I've been telling you this since she was born, right? He's like, yeah, don't worry, I have it all right here. He has this big file. He was like, I remember you've been saying this, and I have it all right here. And I was just
he's
like,
even the one that brought up OI when we were there, before anything really got crazy.
It was like when he walked in, it was like the biggest breath of fresh air for me. Because I'm like, finally somebody can come in that knows her medical history, knows the things I've been concerned about for the last 7 months. Everything is going to be okay now.
So when the police showed up, that's when you recognized, oh, all this, what I thought was the paperwork helping us get to a diagnosis is now
I was
becoming...
still totally naive. I had no idea.
Oh, you weren't there yet?
No, I was there, but I was totally naive. I had no idea that this is going where it was going.
Yeah.
I'm thinking this is just technicalities.
The first red flag is that the CPS comes in. One of them's younger and one of them's older. And the younger one's just like, oh, blah, blah, blah. And they give us some papers to sign. It's like release of medical records, this and that. And I'm like, okay. And so I'm reading it. And then one of the pieces of paper, it's like the language in the writing is very accusatory. And I'm like,
See, I don't even notice those things.
What's the deal with this? Like, you know, and the older one didn't say really anything at all up to that point. And then she just comes off with like some attitude and like basically just says, you know, I forget exactly what she said, but she's just explaining like, oh, you got to sign it. You know, we need this, blah, blah, blah. Like very blunt and just
matter of
cold
fact,
and
that was the first time that you recognized that.
that's
not,
what
not
I
everyone
thought.
here is
Yeah,
fully
that's what I was
sided with
first kind of
us.
like, whoa, what is going on
Sure.
here now?
And we're
You
separated at
want me
this
to
point.
sign paperwork and this doesn't look right. Like
and
up
you're
to that
also
point,
dealing with your daughter.
well,
Exactly.
So you're balancing every emotion you can think
And
of.
I'm literally holding her as she's got this crazy Pavlik cast on. I mean, it's like this big contraption. And I'm holding her while they're like sitting here, you know.
And
she's
by
been
this
up
time,
for
it's
hours,
very late,
way
way
past
past
her
your bedtime.
bedtime.
We
Right.
got there at 6, and we were there till
It was
like
about 9:15, 9:30 when the cops showed up.
yeah. So we had been there for hours already.
And we didn't get out there until 3 o'clock in the morning.
yeah.
I'm sorry, I derailed you. So then
Yeah.
the pediatrician.
Yeah,
shows
so the
up.
pediatrician came in and he was basically, I was so excited he was there because I was like, okay, we're going to get answers now and we can put all this other stuff aside and focus on a diagnosis. And he kind of went behind the scenes with the ER doctors and the CPS workers, and I was in the waiting room getting questioned by the police. And that was where my red flag happened. I didn't know, but in the back of my mind, I'm thinking Dr. Perlman's here and he's, you know, handling all the medical aspect of it. That's going on there. And I'm over here just getting this finished. And that's when I had my red flag where the officers they were very different to me than they were to Nick, and were very offensive. And we found this out later after watching police cam footage, but we had 2 different experiences with the police officers. And with me, they were asking me very silly questions, trying to get me to trip up, like, what was Isla wearing this morning? She was wearing her pajamas with flowers on them. Okay, but then what did you change her into? And I was just like, this is kind of weird, but I was cooperative, you know, and I was just answering their questions. And then he'd be like, okay, but then you said earlier she was wearing this. And I'm like, wait, what's going on? Like, that's when I realized, oh, they think that I did something because they're trying to trip me up and like ask me weird. So that's when I had my moment, like, what's going on here? What's happening? And then they were asking me weird questions like, okay, we saw your maiden name is Valdez. Were you born here? And I was like, oh yeah, I was born in Santa Clara. And he was like, no, were you born here? And I'm like, yeah, in Santa Clara County, that's where I was born. And he was like, no, are you an immigrant? Like literally because of my last name.
Oh my gosh.
And I was just like, oh my, like all of these things were just like piling on me. And I was just like, what is happening right now? Like I'm in the hospital with my daughter and she could have cancer, because that's literally all I was thinking was like bone cancer. That's all that could come to mind, because I've never heard of these rare diseases. And at that point I had just said to him, okay, are we almost done with this? Because I need to find out if my baby's okay. And then that's when they kind of changed their attitude towards me and were like, we need to do our job. You have a baby in there and you can't say how she broke these bones. So you're going to sit here as long as you need to sit here and answer these questions. And that's when it was just like, oh my gosh, this is really happening right now. And I just kind of shut down and I just didn't even know what to, I went into a state of shock pretty much. And I was trying to be as cooperative as possible because I realized where they were going with this and I didn't want them to say I was being uncooperative. You know, all these things are just going through your mind. Like, you have to act this way. You have to answer the questions. You have to not get too angry. Like, all these things are just going through your mind super, super, super fast. Right. And I can't even tell you what happened after that. The next thing I remember, because I pretty much blacked out after that, the next thing I remember, they were telling us different things like, oh, we're just waiting for a room to open up and then we're gonna check her in, which was a lie. They were just waiting for the paperwork to go through for removal. So this whole time we're both thinking, oh, they're gonna check her in.
Yeah,
and
they kept saying, well, we're getting a room ready for her. Mm-hmm. So we're thinking, okay, she's gonna get admitted, we'll figure out whatever's going on.
Yeah, whatever this mess is, will get figured out, because once they get her admitted, they're gonna run tests, they're gonna find out what's wrong with her, and then they can deal with that mess.
Yep.
But that was not the case. There was no medical anything going on. It was a complete abuse investigation. They were not running tests. They were not doing blood work. They weren't concerned about anything medical whatsoever. They were
Trying to build a case
for an abuse investigation. So the next thing I know, I was outside and I was calling my mom, updating her, calling his mom, updating her. And the next thing I remember is when the police came out and they kind of just, it was 2 or 3 of them, and they surrounded me and they said, so we're gonna remove your child right now from the hospital. And I was like, what? Like, what's going on? And she had said that the next thing I remember her saying, and where is your son? Because we're gonna go pick him up now too. And that's when I lost my mind, because
they're taking your children.
Yeah, and for Isla, of course, I was upset, but she was an infant. And I thought they were going to remove her from my care by admitting her to the hospital, and we wouldn't be able to see her until they got a diagnosis. But with Noah, he was a full-blown toddler who had never been watched by anybody aside from our immediate families. He didn't go to daycare. The only people he was ever around was church and our families, and he was I was a stay-at-home mom, so he was extremely attached to me. And as soon as they said that it was the middle of the night, they said they were going to go pick him up. So immediately I just lost my mind, because I'm like, he's literally going to be scared to death. Like, I don't even know if he could survive this. And I started to get really upset. And the officer that was talking to me was a woman. So my initial thought was like, okay, maybe she's a mother. And I went to like put my hand on her shoulder, like, please just listen to me. And she stepped back and she put her hand on her gun. And that's when I was like, oh my gosh, like, this is happening. Like, this is really happening. And I just ran straight into the hospital because he was in the room with Isla in the ER.
Yeah, I was left with her for 4 hours.
Even though she was in extreme danger with us.
Completely by ourselves.
In an ER room.
While also being investigated for...
Not even, there was no investigation going on. They were building a case for it. There was no investigation.
They didn't investigate anything.
That's the biggest fallacy about all of this is there's no investigation.
Right.
It's just build a case.
Goodness.
So from there,
they don't actually try and find out what happened.
Right.
Yeah.
It's just...
This is the only explanation we can think of, so it has to be true.
Yeah.
Which again, that's...
That was the
mandated reporter training that they have to do every year. There's a whole section in there that specifically states that genetic diseases can show these types of dangers and can be confused for abuse. There's a whole section that states that, and so it
was shocking.
I don't give them any leeway.
Sure.
Any leeway whatsoever. I mean, if it's there in the training that you have to do every single year, it states it there, then you have to rule that out.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, or there's got to be something.
Yeah.
I mean, we looked at all the different, red flags, all the different factors, like the commonalities in child abuse cases. We didn't have a single one of those red flags. Not one. I mean...
Yeah, that they have in there.
There's like 13.
Yeah.
And it's like, generally, they said most of the time it's like 6 or 7 out of these get met. And that's generally, on average, we didn't have a single one.
Yeah.
And they,
Ran
just...
with it. Well, so then and then the behind the scenes of that, like I said, I thought our doctor was taking care of it all. We found this out years later because during our civil lawsuit, the police cam footage got released to us and we had to watch it. And that's when like a lot of truths were exposed. Our doctor was actually in the room with them and was like, yeah, it could be this. And the mother's been telling me this and so on and so forth. And they're like, okay, well, if that's the case, then we need to, the CPS worker and the doctors are saying, if that's the case, then we need to admit her and we need to run all these tests. And you need to be here for the next 48 hours to oversee all these tests because you're her pediatrician. And he literally laughs and he's like, tomorrow's a holiday. I'm not gonna I don't think there's a reason to admit her.
Yeah, and he tried telling us there was no medical reason necessary to admit her.
And we believed him until we saw
reason half.
Yeah.
So he literally, this
insurance
didn't
wouldn't
happen.
cover it, like that sort of thing. Like that's what he was telling us, like after the fact.
So we ended up finding out after watching the police cam footage, he was going on vacation the next day and did not want to have to work. And if they admitted her, he would have had to work. So it was
So back to that.
it's crazy.
So your kids are taken away.
So I run into the hospital room and I literally slide open the curtain and I'm hysterical and I'm just screaming, they're taking them, they're taking them, they're taking them. And he's like, what? And that from that moment on, it was a circus. Like I did black out. The last thing I remember was falling on the ground and just screaming on top of my lungs. And I don't remember much from that till when they actually took her. I mean, it was July 4th. The ER was full of people with like firework injuries. Yeah. I mean, it was full. It was very, very dramatic. They put her in a car seat and she was screaming on the top of her lungs. They didn't ask
They had
formula,
this tiny little
they didn't
car
say how they
seat.
were going to feed her.
Cheap, beat up.
And I kept
And they're, like,
asking,
trying
what are
to
you going to feed her?
like,
She was an infant.
Force her into it.
And she has a broken femur.
And
Yeah.
she's got this big, huge, it's a Pavlik harness. It's like a bar that comes across and holds it. So, I mean, it's not just like a cast, right?
And they don't have any training.
No. And they're just jamming her in this thing. And I'm yelling at them like, what are you doing? Like, you want her car seat? I'll go get her car seat. It's
And
like,
they don't tell you where they're taking them. But what we later found out is they literally dropped her off at a group home in downtown.
well, first they took them. Yeah, they dropped it that night. And then the
dropped.
next morning, they took both of them to get, because we didn't
county
finish
hospital.
the full skeletal survey. We didn't finish that night because she was so upset she had a broken femur.
And she was
they're-
exhausted.
She had one x-ray. Now they're moving her around. She's got to hold still while they do all these other x-rays. And she was not having it. She was upset. So she's finally just like, okay, that's enough. I mean, we've done enough, you know? And so they took her the next morning to county hospital to finish the skeletal survey.
Without us. And we didn't know any of this.
Do one on our
She
son
wasn't
as
in our
well. Then they set up all these appointments.
Blood tests. I mean, everything.
Literally, these weren't appointments to diagnose her.
Right.
These were appointments for
Their investigation.
child abuse. These weren't to find out what's wrong with you. This is to find out, literally to build
Still
a case.
building the case.
Yeah.
Build a case that this is child abuse.
Yeah. So that was, they never were concerned about anything medical. It was Stanford really, and our due diligence of just banging down every doctor's door until someone said like, we'll hear what you have to say. And that happened to be a doctor at Stanford who literally almost single-handedly got us out of this mess. So that's why we're just like,
So what was the timeline from like when
7 weeks.
7 weeks they were separated from you guys?
Well, they were separate.
They were in a
Yes,
foster-
legally,
yeah.
legally, yes.
Legally, yes.
They were in the foster home for a week,
7 days.
and the judge was the only reason that it wasn't longer, because they have in California you have to have your first hearing within, I think, like 48 hours. Then from there they always request an extension of like 48 to 72 hours, I think. Then they request an extension, basically to withhold the children from the parents while they get information. So that was it was a Tuesday night. I think it was Wednesday was 4th of July. Tuesday night is when was Wednesday morning, early morning, 4th of July, that they removed them. Friday was our hearing. The judge, like the second we got there, as soon as we walked in, you could tell the judge was just like, whoa. We literally filled the entire courtroom with family.
People that showed up on your behalf.
Family.
Well, because that night we were telling CPS and the police, look, we've got 50 people. We can pick up the phone
Right
and they
now,
can.
like
and
they will literally be
they
in
will
this
take
room.
them.
We
We'll
won't
go
see the
wherever.
kids.
We'll leave town. I don't care.
Yeah, you can put us.
And our son was with our niece. It wasn't even with us.
Yeah.
And
They said that this wasn't possible.
no, we can't. It could have been anyone that did this, blah 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 blah. That was their excuse.
I was like, we have an entire church community that we can call our pastor, and anyone in that community will come over here and take the kids. And nope, because it could have been them that did this. We don't. It could be anyone that knows them that did this to them, which we later found out that's not protocol. They are supposed to place them with somebody that they know. It's just a lot of things that just happened that were just not supposed to happen.
So after that week that they were in the group home, where did they go after that?
They got released to her parents.
Who became temporary foster parents. They had to go through the training. They had to get their house checked out. It was a whole process in
Background
itself.
checks.
Yes.
And were you allowed to go over there?
We were, but only within the certain hours that we were given. So we could be there at like no earlier than 9 a.m., no later than 5 p.m. And we were told that if you violate these hours, then your parental rights could be terminated, and they can pop by your caseworker, and any CPS worker can pop by anytime to make sure that you're not there before 9, that you're not there after 5. Like,
And
you can't be alone with
can't be
them.
alone with
So
them.
my mom basically, my parents, one of them, they both worked full time, and she had to take an emergency leave because we weren't even allowed to be alone in a room with them. And they put the fear in us that they could be sitting outside parked in the parking on the street watching. And if they see in the window that you're alone with them, that you're done. When in actuality, nobody ever came once to check on them. But so that was for how many weeks?
6 weeks.
6 weeks that they were in my parents' custody, and they were not allowed to come to our house.
And you still, at this point, don't have a diagnosis?
No, the first thing we did was as soon as they got back to her parents, the first thing we did was we took her to Stanford and to see it.
But we had to be with my parents. So every appointment we took them to, one of my parents had to be with us.
Right. And you're the ones seeking out the specialist, seeking out the
Oh,
medical. Like, you're not
100%.
being referred.
I'm not waiting.
You're doing all the work.
Yeah.
So they actually said in court documents, you will see the child abuse specialist, who is really just a glorified pediatrician for the county. Those are her only credentials, is pediatrician. She actually put in black and white writing in documents that it was highly unlikely that Isla could have any kind of metabolic disease because she looked normal.
And she was
That
not
was her
responding to the level of
diagnosis.
pain
And-
that
well,
most people
That
would have
wasn't even
been.
what she said. Like, she
that
just said
wasn't
she
irrational.
physically looked normal.
Yeah.
So
And
therefore
OI
she's
is
not.
so rare.
Right.
And
Literally that's what she.
And then she
that was
also
her-
told us she would look deformed because she looks normal. Like, there's no way she could have this because they look people with this condition look deformed.
That's what she's saying.
Yes.
Those are her
That was
words.
the justification
Yeah.
for not.
And what a terrible
referring.
thing to say.
Yeah. And it goes back to invisible diseases, you know,
Right.
it's like people really have this stigma, and that people with conditions look a certain way. They're in a wheelchair, or they have deformities to their bones or limbs or face. And it's like, no, you have no idea. You have no idea what the average person walking down the street is dealing with internally. None. And it's really, really, really sad that even our medical professionals that courts depend on even have that mentality. And that's what's terrifying and heartbreaking at the same time.
Which goes back to your point of how important it is to find the ones that are in it to actually.
Oh yeah, no, you have
find
to
out
do.
what's going on,
It doesn't matter.
and we'll-
Anything in life, you have to be your own advocate.
Yeah.
And no one else is going to do it for you.
Yeah.
So we had to seek out the doctors. Then I even told the first appointment that we actually got to go to for the county doctor. We showed up there, and she's like, "Oh, so you guys knew the new foster parents, blah blah." We're like, "No, we're her parents," and she lost it.
She got really
She had
angry.
no idea.
Yeah.
She's like, "Oh, so I wish somebody would have told me." Blah 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 blah. Like, she was like frazzled, big
That you
time.
were there.
That we
Yeah.
were there, and we were the parents. And then, well, because their job is to make a case,
Right.
not do
Right.
anything else. And we're like, yeah, we took her to Stanford. She's like, lost it again. What? This complicates everything. Like, blah blah blah. I was like, it complicates everything to get a second opinion. And she said, well, blah blah blah. I was like, do you even have her medical records? Like, all
She
of this
didn't
stuff
even
was
have
made
her
available.
medical
Because the next
records.
day, on 4th of July, I went down to the county hospital where she was being taken. I went down there and I got all the records because I knew she had an appointment. I got all the records I could from there. I went to all 3 hospitals that she had been to, because she had respiratory issues when she was younger. So she'd been to one hospital, then she'd been to the emergency room like 3 or 4 times already before this. Nothing having
And
to do
nothing
with
was ever
bones.
caught. Yeah.
And so I went around to all the hospitals and got all the medical records. And I also got the medical records from the doctor. Like, on the 4th, I gathered everything. Everything there was to have, I had in my hands. And I mentioned that well, I didn't mention it, but it was our attorney mentioned it in court to CPS at the first hearing on Friday. And then I was like, did you even get this stuff yet? We signed all the paperwork that night for you to get all of these records. And this is 3 weeks. Now this is 3 weeks later. And she's like, no, I'm still waiting. But I was like, I have them all. I can bring them to you. This is ridiculous. What are you doing? You know? And she's like, oh yeah, if you could bring it to us, that'd be great. You know, blah, blah, blah.
And it's like, that's when the judge basically, he was just like, okay, something's not right here. Like, you guys aren't doing your job. Why are these kids not home with their parents? Like, you have nothing new. Every court hearing, you have nothing new to present to me. Like, so it was
He pretty much knew that off the bat because, like I said,
he was in a tough place.
Yeah. We went, as many times we were there, every time we were there, the place was empty. I mean, completely empty.
Yeah,
there would be
it was really sad.
One mother, one father, and 1 or 2 kids. That's it. Like, nobody else was there. It was like a ghost town in there. And we showed up the first hearing and literally filled it. I mean, there's 25, at least 25 people there. And so as soon as we walked through the door, he was like, whoa. And he's like, okay, let me just get everyone's names because this is like not something I typically see.
Sure.
You know, so he knew right off the bat that something wasn't
There's something
right.
different about the situation than what he normally sees.
I mean, nothing had been said. I don't even know if he had looked at the docket yet, but all of a sudden you've got this walking into your courtroom that you know, it's your job. That's what you'd see every day. Right off the bat, this is not right, you know? And so he hammered them that first hearing because they were like, oh, you know, her appointment's tomorrow, you know, or Sunday or something like that. We couldn't get the appointment. And he's like, you better have something by Monday or, you know, that's it, you know? And so he's like, this is ridiculous. This shouldn't take this long. You guys have 72 hours. And then Monday came and, oh, well, you know, it was literally just a reiteration of what their first paperwork was. And he's like, that's it. Like, you know, get into the parents, you know, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, okay, well, we'll try and make that happen. He's like, no, you're going to make it happen today. Like, I mean, he was just hammering.
But he was in a tough place because he still has to do his job. He still has to rule, you know.
Yeah, because, I mean, there are situations where the children are at risk and, you know, that happens.
Yes, but he was a great judge. He was a really good judge. But it was just like in between, it was just so many different things to get a diagnosis. And it's at the end of the day, it was, when you're in court, every single week you're silenced as the parents. You can't talk. You're not allowed to speak.
So
family
on top of
court
all the trauma,
is a whole different.
All the trauma of the medical, something's going on with Isla, and then we go to the hospital, and we get separated, and that's a whole nother level of trauma, and our son's getting taken away, that's trauma for him. And then now we have to think from a legal perspective, not just the health perspective, so we got to find an attorney, whole nother level of trauma and stress.
There's four. Three.
Oh my gosh.
I had to have one. She
had
had to have one.
Right.
The kids had to have one.
Oh, yeah.
Who's paying for that?
So I had a paid private attorney.
We retained an attorney.
He had court appointed.
And when we showed up at the first hearing, they're like, okay, you guys have to have separate attorneys.
Yeah, because we're 2 individuals, and it could possibly be a separate prosecution where they
down
end up
the
pitting
road.
it on
It wasn't
him.
even at that point. It was down the road. And
so we had luckily, and that's again is when I talk to people and all of this, it's like, luckily we had the means, and we didn't even. His parents did. His parents paid for my attorney. But there's so many people that can't afford an attorney. So these cases just go on forever. And so I had an attorney paid by his parents, and then he had a court-appointed attorney, and the kids have court-appointed attorneys because it's just mandatory that kids have them. So, but they don't really do anything. They're supposed to advocate for the children, but they don't. And it was just a mess. And then in between all of this, like, you're dealing with, at the end of the day, your goal is to not have your parental rights terminated in this broken system. But at the same time, you have a sick child. So it was just like the craziest thing ever.
So take us forward to when you got your diagnosis. Was she still in your parents' care?
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's when you went to Stanford.
So throughout all these weeks, people were always like, what did you do? Like, did you just lay in bed? Like, I couldn't be able to function. I'm like, we were so busy. We didn't even have time to eat. Like, he was running all over town, doing all of these medical files, collecting extra.
We were going to 2 sets of doctor's appointments, the county doctor appointments.
Every day was something
Stanford
different.
doctor appointments.
So we're managing the county aspect.
We got to figure
and
out
the Stanford aspect.
Figure out navigate this legal, because it's not finding an attorney to take the case was difficult enough. There's only a couple attorneys in the area that even
because you
deal
have to
with these
be
types of
licensed
cases.
with a special. Basically, you have to have gone through a specific type of law to represent these type of cases, and there's not many people that do. So when she got diagnosed, it was through Stanford, and it was very murky and very messy. But our attorneys at that point were like, okay, because I think the hearing was like a week later, and our attorneys reached out to the county and were like, we have the results, they're positive, we need to move this up so that these parents can move on with their lives and now navigate this world of having their daughter with this condition. So they agreed to move it up to that Monday. And at that point, our attorneys were like, the judge said that he can only imagine that you both have quite a bit to say. So he's allowing you to do closing statements in the case. So we both spoke, and it was like, it's like, how do you even put it into words? But we went to that closing hearing, and that hearing, nobody from the legal team showed up. The kids' attorneys didn't show up. Our caseworker didn't show up. Basically, nobody wanted to show their face. And which was really disheartening too, because we, in that moment, you want to look them in their eyes, be able to torture that they put us through. I mean, it was absolutely awful how many things that we were told that were lies, and it was just awful. So the judge basically apologized to us on behalf of the courts and the system, and we both made our statements, and they were both very different. His was very logical, mine was very emotional,
And
but both very
rational
powerful.
and accurate.
Yes, both very powerful. And mine was just really, I wanted the judge and everyone there to really just humanize the situation. Like, this could have been you, this could have been anybody. Like, we were leading very normal lives for 24 hours before this happened, and very normal, boring, uneventful lives. And this could have been anyone. And I hope that nobody ever has to go through this for a diagnosis ever again.
And you've made steps to make sure that doesn't happen, right?
Yes. Yeah. So that was years in the making.
And another one of those things.
Yeah. It was just.
There's like 3 or 4 attorneys in the entire state that deal with suing the government is a chore. And there's only 3 or 4 of them that in the entire state that will do it.
Yeah.
And
they live in one of them lives in San Diego, and one of them actually is here in San Jose. And we had both of them, and they're the only 2 in the state.
So you made, did you make a policy change?
Yes. So when we wanted to move forward, we got so much, different opinions, like, just move on with your life, and just be happy, thankful that it's over, and revenge isn't the way to go, and this and that, and all these different things. But I was like, this isn't about any of that. Like, I don't care if we see $1 out of this. Like, nothing will ever replace, first of all, the money we put out for everything, and therapy and just everything. Like, it's not about the money at all. I don't care if we see a dime. I just want to make sure, if I can in any way, shape, or form, at least help one person not have to go through this for a diagnosis. And if that's a policy change, it's a policy change. If it's somebody getting fired, it's somebody getting fired. I mean, something has to give. Like, I will not let this go, because it was just to find out how many families, specifically with OI, have gone down this road to get a diagnosis specifically for OI. It was like the curtain was pulled back, and it was just horrible.
Do you have a ballpark number or percentage in the research that you've done that of
Gosh.
the families that end up with a diagnosis similar to this have been
I would
victim of the
say
broken system?
Is everyone on Fractured Families,
Fractured
right?
Families. There's an organization called Fractured Families, and it's people that have been misdiagnosed, basically all kinds of metabolic conditions, OI, rickets, ED, vitamin D deficiencies, all of those. And there are thousands in that group, thousands.
And that's
families.
just on the group. And then through just everything I was doing, trying to research, attorneys and the laws and everything. Because I mean, they're taking your kids, right? That's not. That goes beyond, right? There's some sort of
it's not a small violation of your rights.
Exactly, right? And so, there's at least 4 or 5 cases that had happened previously that had been, argued that it was a similar situation. And then when we finally found our attorney, he was handling a case at the time, right then and there. And he had done this for 20 years. So he's seen it over the years. And that's just, Orange County and like that's basically the state of California. And that's just the people. And those types of cases are really difficult. So he only takes a handful of what actually he comes across, his desk. But
the policy change.
That's a lot.
It's
all over.
Yeah.
New York. I mean, it's in every state.
Sure.
Texas. It's everywhere.
But mainly the policy change that I wanted to see, I knew couldn't go outside of Santa Clara County because that's what we were focusing on, was that if an immobile child came into an ER that only had internal injuries, that metabolic conditions would be ruled out prior to removal. So that's all I wanted to see, because when we brought her in, she didn't even have a bruise on her body. And at one point I was like, then they told me in the hospital, they suggested that I got so angry that I got her by the leg and threw her down and snapped. I'm like, wouldn't you see a bruise if I did that? Right. Oh, well, babies actually don't bruise. What? That was what I was told by a doctor in the emergency room. And so it's just insane, the things that would come out of their mouth
to justify it. You focused on, if you run these tests and rule all of this out, if that had been done, it would have been a completely, the next 7 weeks would have been completely different for your life.
It's a blood test.
Yeah.
That's all it is. It's a blood test. It's a blood test that can come back positive. So that's all I wanted to see, and also different things as far as doing medical exams on children, to getting permission from the parents. If the parents don't give permission, then they need to get a court order. That wasn't done on our behalf. They did really invasive abuse exams on both of our kids without our knowledge and without the court's knowledge. And that's illegal. So we wanted to see that changed, which that did get changed. And they sent us a copy of their updated policy and procedures for Santa Clara County. So that was updated. And we didn't get a clear ruling on the ruling out metabolic conditions, but that is something that will be more highly considered, but they wouldn't require. It was hard enough to even get them to change any policies. I mean, they went through so many attorneys quitting on them because they would not agree to our demands of policy change. And it wasn't even money, it was just policy change. And they wouldn't agree to it. Finally, their last attorney agreed to it. And that's how our case came to a settlement. How many months ago? Oh gosh, it was.
With the county, it was a year ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
So we've talked in this really, I mean, that's a heavy thing.
Very
I can't
heavy,
imagine what you guys have had to carry and navigate through on that side. But how have you tried or been able to shift as much as possible to focus on the future for Isla, to focus on her care and all of the positive things that are still possible on the other side of this diagnosis, and while still navigating the underlying, like, this was terrible, this has to be addressed. There's like this dualistic thing that you have to navigate.
Oh yeah, you gotta take one step first and get that taken care of before you can make the next step, which is a much larger step in the big scheme of things, right? It's the rest of her life. So it was getting through that major hurdle first, and then an even bigger hurdle after that,
which is mostly unknown.
And that's exactly. I mean, we've been we've been blessed that she's blessed. I mean, because and talking with all the doctors, they're like, it's just like anything, you know, it's not just the genetic part of it, but it's also, you know, the rest of your body, right? Like everyone's got, some people have better immune systems, some people are, you know, they're bigger, they're stronger, you know.
Yeah.
Lots of other things come into play, and so that all is affected in the same way. So looking at other kids that have it, you know, some of them have, their symptoms are worse, or they seem worse because maybe they have other things that are going on also. And we've just been lucky that it seems like that is really the only thing.
It's really a miracle. Like everything where she's at today is a miracle. I tell people all the time, like, you cannot tell me miracles don't exist. Her legs at one point were bowed, and then they did an x-ray, and then they were straight. And her doctor was just like, I have no explanation for this. And I'm like, I do. I have an entire church praying for her day in and day out. So she's a miracle. But I mean, as far as all of the allegations and that process, it's like that will always be a part of our journey. That will always be a part of our story that I'll never want to forget, as odd as that sounds, because it's still happening to this day. And it slowed down a little bit, but there was a point where I was getting 2 DMs a month on Instagram of people. I use hashtags that like medical kidnap or misdiagnosed. And I use certain hashtags that only somebody going through this would know about. Fractured families is one of them. And they find me through those hashtags, and they will DM me and be very vague and be like, I think you went through what I'm going through. Could you please call me? And I have talked to people from literally out of the country to New York, to Texas, to Boston, to Israel. I mean, it's incredible that they find you through hashtags and reach out to you, and they're going through this. And that, as long as I still get those DMs, I don't ever want to forget what we went through, because if I can be that one person to help that one person, and even I'll get him on the phone because he's so, he knows so much about the legality of everything. So I'll kind of get them to the emotional aspect, and then I'll be like, okay, hold on, let me talk to my husband. And
you can give some practical next steps if you're hurt.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's that part.
What a mission you've been given to help those families. Like, yes, you went through this, but you're on the other side, and now look what you can do.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like they say, the purpose in your pain. And I'm like, this is the purpose, like, to help these people going through this. And so it's hard. Like, I still deal with PTSD. I still
of course you
deal with trauma. There was a long time where, like, if the kids would cry in public, I would start panicking because I had such unrealistic thoughts of someone's going to call CPS on me and they're going to say they see that I have a file. I mean, that's going to be on my record for the rest of my life. And there was moments where we thought, like, I would never be able to help in the kids' classrooms because I was under an investigation for abuse, even though it was dropped. Like, I'm always nervous anytime I get background checks on me that that's going to come up and people are going to find out and that don't know me and know what we went through. And I mean, there's doctors' offices, like, people.
The biggest thing for a long time was having to take her and having to take her to the doctor or a hospital or anything.
Anytime anyone questions me about anything in a hospital, I start to just
we
shut
literally
down.
Drive the extra 20 minutes to go to Stanford
because they know her. Like,
I mean, her whole team is there. Everything's internal in the computer system. Like, and during this whole process, we were going through the court and everything, she ended up breaking her other femur, and so we had to go. It was like, I mean,
they literally had
she
to
was
get
a wreck
prepared
because she's
to take
just
her
like,
again. Like,
like, what is gonna? It's getting towards the end, but she breaks her other one, and it's like,
so
what do we do? So we drove. Went to let's just go to Stanford because that's where we've been going.
And that's where you found the advocates. That's the people that you found that would align and help you find the answers.
Exactly. And so even to this day, I mean, still anything major comes up, it's just, all right, we'll take the extra drive because it's not worth having to deal with
Yeah, I definitely am a better place now with going to hospitals and doctor's offices. There's sometimes like little triggers like that happen, but it's nowhere near where it used to be. But as far as OI and navigating that whole aspect of it is just really also just helping people and people with kids with OI that get diagnosed and they find through hashtags and just letting them know it is going to be okay. And Isla is such an inspiration to so many OI families on Instagram. I say Instagram so much because that's my only social media platform. But I mean, I have DMs full of people like, she gives me so much hope for my son that he will, you know, he's one now, that he's gonna walk and he's gonna be happy and healthy. And it's just so many families really depend on posts of Isla to give them hope that day when they're having a hard day with their child with OI. So many reasons like that. And then the other aspect of it is just invisible conditions and just really bringing light to not only rare diseases, but invisible diseases. So all of those.
It's really opened my eyes as someone in the, you know, dealing with all these rare kiddos. Because you look at pictures of her and I'm like, well, she seems like she's doing great. And I mean, it taught me a lesson for sure to learn more about that.
Yeah, I know when I first
and she is doing great.
Yeah,
but you know what I mean.
Yeah,
like,
when I first looked at
your
Instagram, Go Shot Love's Instagram, I was just like, oh, it's kind of, I feel kind of odd being a part of this because these children have very visible disabilities, and you know, and then there's Isla, and I don't want people to think like, oh, what's wrong with her, you know, and then
it's
actually
gonna be a good lesson.
Yeah, and one of my girlfriends, my very close friend, she was just, when I told her, she just started crying. And she was like, I'm so happy. Like, now people will see, you know, like what you're going through every day. Like, people don't know. And when she was little and I would be at the park with her, people were like, oh, like, you should be a helicopter parent. Like, you should let her learn on her own. And it was so painful because they hadn't, I don't want to be doing that, but you have no idea. Or when she would be with Cass, I had a woman in a grocery store be like, you need to be more careful. Like, I've never seen a baby that small with a cast on.
I believe there's people out there that see
you have no idea. And it's worse. I shouldn't say it's worse. It's different when they look normal, but they have an elephant in the room, or a parent that's, you know, looking overbearing, but they look normal. So obviously that parent must be crazy. And I had to deal with that for years. And so many of my close friends, like, their hearts broke for me because they would just hear those comments all the time when we'd be out together. And it was very painful, and I've definitely desensitized to it now. Or even the comments, just give her more milk. Like, if I had $1 for every time someone said that to me, I would be rich. We would not be living here.
Oh, thanks, doctor.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Why don't you just up her calcium? Like,
so
what's wrong with you? Like, you're a horrible mom. You don't just up her calcium. But those are the kind of comments you get when somebody looks normal, but you find out that they have a condition. But why? What are you doing to fix it? She's already halfway normal, you know, and or just comments like, really, she has that, but she looks so good. It's like, it's not helpful. And that's just, as a person and a parent with a daughter or a child with an invisible condition, it's a difficult world to navigate in a completely different way than somebody that has a child with disabilities that is visible.
Yeah.
And in some ways it can be harder to navigate because people don't understand, because they can't see it. You know, that's just a common way of life. If you don't see it, you don't believe it. If you don't see it, you can't understand it.
No, talk about faith.
Yeah.
You mentioned all of these things that are unhelpful, but you've also referenced those that have shown up for you throughout different stages of this journey. What would you say are the most helpful acts of love or kindness or support that you've received from family or friends, or, you know, those that have been closest to you that have helped you help you get through these tough times?
We're very, very fortunate to have an amazing church community. I mean, they were our backbone throughout our journey. They really were just, I mean, I don't know how I would have done it most days when it was for some certain church members that would just pick up the phone and call me. And I was like, you have no idea how much I needed this phone call, or would write letters, or, and a lot of times you don't know what you need. When people say, what can I do? It's like, I don't know, like there's nothing you can do. Nothing can fix this, per se. But I mean, even just letters, like letters goes to people, old school, writing a letter and mailing it to you. Like those were some of the things that stuck out most to me in my moments of like my greatest despair, when I was home and the kids were in foster care, and I dragged myself off the ground and opened the mailbox, and there was just a letter in there from a church member telling me, like, you're strong, you can do this, we love you, and we support you. Like 2 sentences would get me through that next hour. So things that are very little that people probably don't think matter mean a great deal. And I still have those letters and notes to this day. So really just small acts of kindness go a very long way, rather than saying, what do you need? Because in those moments you don't know what you need.
Yeah.
You feel like you don't need anything because nothing matters.
Yeah.
So
Nick, what about you?
I mean, we both have really good family, a lot of support, larger family, 3 siblings, so four kids in each family that are very supportive. But as far as navigating the actual OI portion of it, I would say definitely the church and school, like school. So we end up sending them to the school because everybody knows them. They've known both of them. They know everything that they went through. So it makes that transition for them that much easier. Well, for Isla, knowing about her condition and not having to ask questions or explain. It's a known thing going into it, so it's familiar. They've dealt with her like when she was in the daycare, when we show up at church and everything like that. So that's been a huge, I mean, I couldn't imagine sending her to a public school and having to go through and explain all of this to every teacher every year. This is the situation. Like, it's just that, just explaining it and going through all that is hard enough. But having people at least there on the staff, maybe not dealing with her on a daily basis on the classroom setting, but at least having somebody else there that can be like, hey, look, I got this, like I know what's going on, or I know what needs to do, or I just pick up the phone, call, parents, if whatever the case is.
Having community is so important. And I know there's families out there that don't have large families, or maybe don't have, a faith-based community, or they don't want to be a part of the OI community like I am. But my biggest recommendation is to find some sort of community, whether it's a reading group that you find online that likes sci-fi and you like reading sci-fi books. Like, just really find a community and be vulnerable and let people tell your story. I know there's, especially in falsely accused families, there's shame there's embarrassment, and you don't know what people are going to think, or even people have a hard time telling people that their kid has a disability because they don't want them to be treated differently. But my biggest piece of advice is to share your story. It isn't only healing to you, but you also don't know whose life you're going to change, or who you're going to really get off the ground that day because they thought their life was over by hearing your story. But it also is very self-healing, and the more you tell your story, the more you heal internally, as well as helping other people.
Yeah.
So.
We were talking a little bit in the beginning about words that you would use to describe Isla. And Nick, Amanda said that Isla's a daddy's girl. So I want to give you the chance to describe her and maybe brag about what it's like to be her dad.
She is fierce. That's for sure. She's it's funny, my mom says that is a girl version of me. Like, that is exactly how I was as a kid. Like, I mean, when she was 4, she was going on 14. I mean, the things that come out of her mouth, you're just like, are you serious? Like, you're and just the other day, she was right before bed. She doesn't know how to read yet. I mean, that's she just started kindergarten. She knows the alphabet. That's it, as far as we know. And so we just start writing. She starts with like 3-letter words, and she starts sounding it out. Boom, gets it every time.
Like, oh my gosh, she can read.
Like just like that, like it's nothing. And you can hear her. She's figuring it out right there. It's not a word that she knows, memorizes, like from books or anything like that. She's literally just taking a word and writing it. And like, she just starts 3-letter, 4-letter words. And then they were being kind of feisty that night. So I wrote trouble, right? and Noah's like, he couldn't quite get it right. And Isla, she just, and she sounds it out and gets it, and she's just, but she's got a smart comment every time you say something to her too. You say something, well, and she'll take something that you said and turn it around later, like, oh, do this, and she'll be like, oh, but you told me not to do that last time, like blah blah. She remembers, she's smart, she'll get you. So she's challenging. She's definitely fierce, and she's super sweet. She's like the baby. She's just like all about like any baby. Pick up, carry around, take care of, feed. Very nurturing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What's the biggest lesson she's taught you?
It's just, to me, it's not letting something take you down that far. I mean, what she's gone through, and she just pulls right through, just picks herself up and just goes. Like, it doesn't faze her. It's literally short-lived. Whatever the disappointment is, whatever it is, it's short-lived, and she's
like, let's just get it over with. When she has really bad IV days where they can't get an IV to stick, and they're bursting vein after vein, the nurse will look at her like, do you need a break? And she's like, no, let's just get it done. And she's 4 years old, 3 years old, she'd be saying that. And they would, are you sure? Yep, it's like she knows it has to be done, so let's just do it. And she doesn't complain, she doesn't put up a fight. She knows what needs to be done, and she gets it done, and she picks herself up and she moves on. And that's been her since the day she was born. It's incredible.
She's a rock star.
Yeah, she is. Yeah. When we asked Noah, I've read your guys' questions, I asked Noah, I said, what words would you describe your sister as? Brave. Brave. I can't do anything that she could ever do. It's like, we always say if we had to have one kid that had OI, thank goodness it was Isla and not Noah, because he would not survive.
Oh, yeah.
But he seems to love on her well.
Yes, they're very, very close.
They've been through a lot together.
Yeah, they have, and he's been through a lot just navigating. I've seen a quote recently that was like, if you want to know how to treat a special needs child, look at their sibling.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's like, that is that boy to a T.
The siblings are the most incredible kids.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this has been great. Thank you for letting us be here and be in your home. And
we could stay here all day.
We could talk all day, obviously.
You said like the name of the diagnosis and what that means.
Probably not. We probably need to get just a quick clip of that. Yeah.
For the video, for the voiceover.
So give us.
Okay.
And that means just a brief statement.
Okay. So Isla has OI, which is short for osteogenesis imperfecta, and her specific type is type 5.
Perfect.
That's all I needed.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being vulnerable. I know, especially reliving some of reliving the medical side stuff enough, but when you add in this other element that you guys have had to deal with, I'm sure that's not easy to do.
At Go Shout Love, we do amazing things for amazing families with kids on rare medical journeys. Each month, we shout love for families through the sale of creative apparel inspired by the kids. This month's More to the Story design is inspired by Isla, a spirited 5-year-old from San Jose, California. With a diagnosis that isn't easily noticeable, Isla's story reminds us that there's always more to people than what we can see. Every purchase in October will go toward regular infusion treatments for Isla that will help strengthen her bones and provide pain management. Visit our website at goshout.love to support Isla through the purchase of a t-shirt, hat, tank top, hoodie, or other items.